Drive Time on BCFM, 5 till 7 on 93.2 FM.
Well, Roger Cook. The Cook Report was Britain's most popular current affairs TV series ever, bringing in an audience around 10 million every week. Roger lives in the West Country, and earlier this week I talked to him about the news of the world and some of the programmes that he made before his series was unceremoniously axed.
I'm Roger Cook. I used to front the Cook Report on ITV and had a very large run-in with the news of the world in about 2000 when they decided, I think probably out of professional jealousy, that they would have me. And they managed to persuade a couple of very junior ex-employees who seemed to be in it for the money to invent stories. And one in particular, who was a former specialty cameraman, did undercover work, took £27,000 from them for making up stories which the film he took would disprove anyway, although he was far too fly to give them the film, and they were too interested in getting the story to ask for it. Anyway, after about 2 years and millions of pounds expended, they settled out of court, and after 10 or 12 pages of libel, 3 of them front pages, during which they accused me of faking everything they'd ever done, they were forced to admit that the Independent Television Commission, which was the regulator then, was right when, after an 18-month investigation, they'd said we'd not broken the regulatory code, we'd done nothing wrong, we hadn't deceived anybody, and we were right. They had to concede about a year on, when the cost was still further escalating, that the ITC was right. And there was an apology, if you can call it that, on page 38, covering 2.5 column inches. And the Press Complaints Commission, for whom I have no time either, thought that was what they called due prominence.
Your programme, The Cook Report, did use some fairly unorthodox methods.
I don't think they're unorthodox at all. We were first to use them. We would use stings, for example, carefully set up stings. The difference between what we did and what tabloids did was that we would only cause people to take part in these stings to demonstrate what it was they did for a living. Known fraudsters, known IRA or UDA fundraisers, for example, they would be encouraged by, obviously, greed or sometimes ego and sometimes both, to present themselves for the camera, thinking they were going to do something else. Now, that's very different from Jack Straw's son at one stage, who thought he was going to get his leg over an attractive Mirror reporter, supplied her with a very small quantity of cannabis, after which he was portrayed as a drug dealer, which he certainly wasn't. So there's a big difference. I mean, we were exposing major criminals. We were exposing, for example, as I said, fundraisers for the UDA, one of whom tried to extort money from me sitting in the back of the car carrying a gun, and went down for 10 years after the film was shown in court, and it was the only evidence that was given apart from my own, because people in the province of Northern Ireland were a bit scared, naturally, about coming out and talking about the paramilitaries. So there was a big difference. They'd accused us, the News of the World, at one stage they said we'd faked everything that we'd ever done. How they could possibly prove that in court when we did 130-odd programmes, none of which were faked. They were all very, very carefully lawyered. We had our own code of ethics, which I wrote way back in the days of Checkpoint on BBC Radio 4, which we stuck to, and we had a full-time barrister. No other programmes ever had that. So we were very careful about what we did, very ethical, but they said we weren't. The Independent Television Commission were asked by the News of the World to do an investigation. They made a formal complaint, and when they didn't get the result they wanted, they dismissed it as a whitewash. Eventually they did have to give in. Didn't do me much good, though, because I'd come off the air, as ITV did, unlike the BBC, until I'd proved myself innocent, although they'd said, we don't believe you've done anything wrong, and we'll welcome you back, said the Director of Programmes, with open arms when this is all over and the dust has settled. When that had happened, he wasn't there anymore. And the new incumbent thought I was old-fashioned, expensive, and a bit of a dinosaur, really. So I went on to do other things.
Now, ITV runs on audiences and advertising, and you were bringing in something like 10 million per programme audiences for their advertisers. I mean, surely it doesn't make any commercial sense for them to say we don't want the Cook Report back if they've got a 10 million audience coming with that.
You would think that's the case, but I think they didn't like the fact that it was hard work for them. It wasn't just the programme, it was the aftermath. we had to have a sort of after-sales department to make sure that when we were sued, which we often were, we were well covered and could defend it rapidly and robustly, which we did do. We were sued lots of times, never successfully. The programme actually came off the air around 2000.
Around 2000, and that's the time of this 4-week News of the World sting. One of the programmes, for example, that you did was eerily prescient in that you were looking at the possibility of hijacking aircraft in the United States in the wake of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. And of course, the year after your programme came off, then we had the September the 11th attacks. Now, I wonder whether you watched those attacks and thought, we told you so.
No, we did. But then the people we got the information from said, I told you so too. We got information from the Philippines that a man called Ramzi Youssef, who'd been the mastermind of the first World Trade Center attack, was living there and had been chased out of his flat when a bomb went off in the flat. He was making a bomb using some homemade explosive called TAPT. When he fled, he left his computer behind, and on that computer were all the plans to fly planes into the Pentagon and into the World Trade Center and places like that. And also further plans, not only to assassinate the Pope, that got nowhere near getting off the ground, but also to fly planes into each other. And this was the basis of the shoe bomber plan. So it was all there. And the Filipinos, the head of the Manila police, a wonderfully named man called Hermogenes J. Ebdane Jr., gave them all this material, and they dismissed it as the product of a febrile imagination being offered to them by a straw-chewing hick. So we knew what was going to go on, and a number of people in the States also knew, on the fringes of officialdom, who all said, look, this is going to happen. And in the same program, we, with the help of Dr. Jim Swire, whose daughter Flora was killed in Lockerbie, managed to smuggle onto various planes bombs, fake bombs, but with a substance on board which had the same X-ray signature as Semtex, and we got it through 23 airports. And in one, the worst airport of the lot, the stuff went through the scanner with the operative looking the other way with his feet on the desk reading Sports Illustrated, and our cameraman and a researcher got on the plane with no boarding pass and no ticket. That was Boston Logan Airport. Where did the 9/11 bombers leave from?
Now, you're not the only person to have warned about the possibility of a September 11th type attack. For example, the Deputy Director of the FBI, John O'Neill, he also was warning of some similar attack, and the White House actually blocked his investigation into what he believed were people preparing for such an attack. What is your thoughts in hindsight about 9/11 and the repercussions from it, the war on terror? I mean, is it possible, do you think, that somehow this was allowed to happen because it was expedient?
There were lots of warnings. I mean, there are others. We had a warning from a man from the Federal Aviation Authority called Bogdan Jakovich, who had warned that you could get through almost any airport security, and he'd actually done it. And the authorities blocked all his reports, and when he was still doing these allegedly out-of-the-blue inspections on various airports, he discovered they'd all been told by the authorities, and when he kept pushing, he was demoted and made head of paperclips. The authorities didn't want to know. They really didn't want to know. Expediency, I don't know.
One of the programmes that you did towards the end, Roger, was around the idea of Russian and Soviet soldiers that hadn't been paid for a long time. The problem was that they were actually still on nuclear bases guarding nuclear weapons. So can you tell us about that programme? Because there were some pretty scary revelations, weren't there?
Well, it wasn't just the soldiers. It was the scientists who, before perestroika, had been up the top of the tree, well paid. Afterwards, they weren't paid at all. So to keep their families alive, you can understand why they did it, although it was appalling. They were stealing nuclear material and selling it into the black market via the Russian mafia, who really are tough. As one of the KGB people, or ex-KGB people we spoke to said, they make the Sicilian mafia look like Enid Blyton. Anyway, we, with the help of a Russian journalist who ended up having a nervous breakdown and turning into an alcoholic during the process of making this program, we made contact with members of the mafia and went round to this extraordinary run-down maisonette in the back streets of Moscow, where we were offered, first of all, a sample, and it turned out to be weapons-grade plutonium because we had it tested by Minatom, the Russian equivalent of the Atomic Energy Authority. And the guy went grey as he tested this stuff and said it really is the real stuff. We had a very proper English translator who started to blush, and I said, "What's this man saying?" And he said, "You've been handling this stuff and it's not properly packaged. If I were you, when I go back home, I'd go and have yourself tested because your balls will probably glow in the dark." Fortunately, they didn't. Anyway, we went to this place, and the second time round, and we had organised, and to show you how thorough we are, we actually had, on an overnight purchase, a lot of money, I mean tens of millions of pounds, on deposit in a bank, a crooked bank, in Gibraltar. So when they checked us, as we knew they did, in the little time frame we gave them, the money was there. So we were able to buy what was going to be 6 kilos of weapons-grade plutonium, which we were going to turn into a dirty bomb. You don't have to be clever and make it go fissionable. All you have to do is disperse it. So you stick some gelignite round it, take it to the top of a tall building and blow it up. And we had calculated, with the help of a scientist who used to be in charge of the SALT II talks, that if you did that at the top of a building in Manhattan, bearing in mind the half-life of this material, you wouldn't be able to go into Manhattan for 26,000 years. So it was a pretty frightening prospect. Anyway, when we got back from, very happily, having got all this on film with concealed cameras, to our hotel, we played it back and discovered that a sound lead must have come adrift because we'd made a silent movie. So we had to go back. Now, the first time had been very interesting because they'd kept this stuff, would you believe, took us out into the lobby, and there in a cupboard under the stairs, next to the Hoover, was this fissionable material, which we were going to buy. Anyway, we went back again, and unfortunately he'd thought we were going back because we were very keen, and we'd represented ourselves as emissaries of a seedy Middle Eastern regime. They were very keen because they thought we were, and we wanted to make a bomb, they said. And they said, "Don't worry, we can save you the trouble. We've got a SAM-20 nuclear missile warhead in the back garden under canvas." And they did. Now, you can't, this is just quintessentially bizarre, but you can't say, "I don't like this game, I'm taking my bat and ball and going home," because at that stage they shoot you. So we then used this fact that we wouldn't have the money to buy a ready-made bomb, we'd have to go away again, and scuttled round to the FSB, as I think I said the KGB as was, and these people were arrested on the day, and as far as I know they're still road testing thermal underwear somewhere in the Russian Antarctic.
But there's a really serious edge to this, isn't there, Roger? Because we're being told that the Iranians are trying to sort of start from scratch with uranium, make plutonium in reactors and potentially make a bomb. And what you proved was that because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, you actually proved that these SS-20 warheads, I mean, these are about 10 times the power of a Hiroshima bomb, were available on the black market.
They were, and for, well, lots of money, but comparatively compared to what they would have cost, not very much money. Yes, they were available, and that was pretty frightening. And even if you just got, as we had initially planned to do, just some of the material to make a dirty bomb, and bear in mind, a bomb that would do what I'd suggested to Manhattan was small enough to fit into a briefcase. And the Russians had thought of this themselves. And out of the 70 they made, 23 went missing, and they don't know where they ever went.
In your view, would it have been possible for the Iranian Secret Service at the time to have got hold of one of these?
Oh, come on. If a journalist can do it, certainly a Secret Service man could.
Because one of the interesting things that you always hear from Iran at the moment is we have no intention of manufacturing a bomb. They put it in that particular way.
Well, it might be because they've already got one. Who knows?